it wouldn't be a good story if there wasn't also something under the surface, something that's maybe more thematic, something that the character might not necessarily be aware of, because we need to have conflict in the story. We need to have something that they need to learn, something that changes them, something that they can't possibly be aware of to begin with, because otherwise there wouldn't really be a story.
Yeah.
And that's such an important distinction between plot and story. Welcome back to the Burning Boat Show. We are going to be talking about story structure in this episode. Very technical, very in-depth. We get into something that we're kind of passionate about, which is script writing and what it means to tell a good story. So if you're
bit of the old story
into
theory.
that, this is your episode. If not, you can watch one of the other ones.
Yep.
Quick announcement is that we are currently putting in some work to make our Patreon page a little more exciting, creating some exclusive content, figuring out how we can share a little bit more about what goes on behind the scenes, specifically when it comes to the documentary.
Yeah.
We will be announcing when all of that is available and up to date at some point next week, so stay tuned.
Yeah.
We're excited about that. Otherwise, enjoy the episode. We're doing something different. We thought it would be interesting. We may be wrong, but we thought it might be interesting to talk about story structure, specifically story structure within movies.
Interesting.
Why do we find that interesting? Why are we doing that?
Because we're out of ideas. No, I'm just kidding. I think it's something we've spent a lot of time looking into. We have a lot of different sources we've picked from over the last kind of half year. Obviously, kind of throughout film school and everything, you learn this stuff as well. But at least for me, I was kind of regathering sources, kind of trying to consolidate information from different books and websites and YouTubers even, and I think we've just kind of compiled a nice list of just useful information if you're interested in story, if you're trying to write a script.
What makes a good story?
Yeah,
why
what
do
makes
some
a good
stories
film?
work? Why do other stories not work? Trying to show that there's actually quite a few overarching rules, you could kind of call them, that really are helpful to bear in mind as guidelines. So I guess we should not call them rules, probably call them certain guidelines that really help when it comes to telling a compelling story. And I think one thing we should just mention is that the reason why we got so strongly back into researching specifically story structure was that when
You're a kid.
when coronavirus started, we decided to focus 100% on writing feature film scripts. And spent a significant portion of the first few months doing that before we were contacted by Yes Theory. And our lives changed. But that's kind of where it came from. And before that, even a year before that, in the last year, I've written a full feature film and half of another. So there's been a significant amount of time spent thinking and pondering about what makes a freaking good story, because it's hard.
Very hard.
You think that it's easy, but it's actually really, really difficult to nail what makes it interesting and why do people care? Why should people care? And what makes it an interesting journey along the way. So that's what we wanted to talk about today. A little more specific than the usual podcast, but let's give it a go.
I'm down.
What's a good place? Oh, basically, if you can see, I don't know if the cameras are capturing this, but we've got these storyboards, I guess you could call them, which is cork boards that we have a bunch of different handwritten notes on that we keep out and about, so that we can always kind of just get a glance at what some of the things we've been reading up on say, just to keep it. It's easy to forget.
It's easy to forget, and I think even if you read a book about screenwriting, for example, there's all this information that, are you really going to go back? And sometimes it's kind of spread across multiple pages, right? And it's like, are you really going to go back to the book and constantly be finding these
random
blips
little
of
bits
information? You kind of, it's very easy to forget. So I think it really helps to take notes, like in high school, basically, and kind of consolidate a bunch of information and have it up on the wall for you to constantly be looking at. And, you know, as you're writing, go, oh yeah, this thing, I really need to keep this in mind. I really need to use these as guidelines. So I think I'll also say I made a feature film I finished it a little over half a year ago.
Yeah, I finished the editing of it, yeah.
Yeah. And I think my approach, and I wrote that film, like, I want to say I started writing that film like
a while ago,
like 4, 5, 6 years ago or something.
While you were still in film school.
Yeah, and at the time I very much had the mentality of, I don't want to follow the rules. I just want to write what I think is a good story, what I think would be an interesting story. And I saw the limitations of that kind of in the final film, or things that I now think, had I spent a little bit more time on structure, or, you know, these are all things that people, it goes all the way back to Aristotle of like figuring out what a good story is, or, you know, why people resonate with a story, and all this information that I had just kind of said, nah, fuck it, I'll just do it myself.
Yeah, it's formulaic, it's bullshit. It's just like trying to put someone in a box.
When really it's like, it'd be like a surgeon going, yeah, there's textbooks and there's all these studies and all this research that's been done already, but I'm just kind of going to get in there and figure it out for myself, which is fine, but obviously it takes a lot longer to do that, and obviously there's a lot of good knowledge that you can disagree with ultimately, but you should at least know about it. You know, if you're breaking a rule, you should know why you're breaking the rule, rather than just
not even knowing what the rule is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Where do we start?
We were debating where to start, and I said we should start by defining this term that pops up so often in screenwriting books and in various online sources, which is specifically the want versus the need.
Okay.
And what does that mean, and why is it so important?
Okay.
What's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear want versus need?
First thing that comes to mind is that the want is a little bit more conscious, what the character wants in the story, what the character thinks they want that will make their life better, or make them more whole, or, you know, whatever it may be. And the need is something a little bit more unconscious, something that the character is not necessarily aware of, but what the character actually needs to become more whole, fulfilled.
And it's what kind of is in a lot of ways the foundation for what a good story is this dilemma between, first of all, we should say that most stories follow a single character as the main character. Mm-hmm. There's definitely examples of films that follow an ensemble cast or multiple characters, but there's still always one character who's the primary character, who you can kind of pick out as being the one who's predominantly driving the story forward. And it all kind of starts with having this character want something. Like, what's this story about? There's a plot. There's something that they need to attain or need to learn, or that they're aware of. Yeah. They want to
rob a bank.
They want to bring the ring to Mordor and destroy it. They want to find the person they love. They want to fall in love. They want to be successful. It can be very specific, it can be very general, but there's something that they are aware of that they want.
Yeah. And the want kind of drives the plot.
Yeah. It's what moves the story forward. But it wouldn't be a good story if there wasn't also something under the surface, something that's maybe more thematic, something that the character might not necessarily be aware of, because we need to have conflict in the story. We need to have something that they need to learn, something that changes them, something that they can't possibly be aware of to begin with, because otherwise there wouldn't really be a story.
Yeah.
And that's such an important distinction between plot and story. Plot is more the like, these are the things that happen in a chronological order to get to the end of the film. But the story is like what it all means and what people are learning and why they're doing what they're doing. And that's kind of the best part of any story.
Yeah.
You don't have that without having that super important element of defining what is it that this character needs that they don't have and that they don't necessarily know.
I think typically a film that feels like a very action-heavy film or something where you're just left feeling kind of empty at the end, to me, is a film that is focused solely on plot and doesn't have much story in it. Just kind of like a series of crazy things happen. It does follow the structure, you know, of a 3-act film. But at the end, you don't really understand why you watched that film. You know, you could get into like, oh, I'm into special effects or I'm into fight sequences or something. But you're left kind of, not knowing what the film was trying to say, or like what are you supposed to get out of that, or other than just an exciting hour and a half, you know?
Well, I know that this is the one part we didn't prepare for, but do we have any examples that we can talk about to show this difference between a want and a need in films? I mean, we could take maybe Castaway.
Sure.
So, I mean, the story of Castaway is pretty simple.
Yeah.
A guy's plane crashes into the ocean, and he is the lone survivor and washes up on an island. And the story is about, how does he survive? How does he get back home to the woman he loves?
Yeah.
And so the want is pretty clear. He wants to survive. He wants to get off the island, and he wants to get back with the woman he loves.
Yeah.
But there's so much more going on about what he learns throughout this whole journey and what he really needs to know. And that's why a huge part of story structure is the setup, is developing the character and showing what they're like kind of before the story starts.
Yeah, the status quo.
Yeah, oftentimes there's this feeling of if something doesn't happen to this main character,
there would be no story.
There would be no story, but then they're also kind of, it's hopeless for them. Yeah. Like stasis equals death is also a term that comes up often. That if nothing else changes, this character is really going to live quite a miserable life potentially. And Castaway is set up that way. He's this super work-oriented guy who is so super passionate about what he does, but that's also like all-consuming. And he has a relationship who he clearly cares about this woman, but it's also something that takes backseat to his primary driver, which is career. Yeah. And it could be said that what he really needs to learn throughout the story is how important relationships are and how valuable they are and what that really means. What is life really about? It's not just about having a successful career. Yeah. It's basic. It's nothing like revolutionary or like, oh my God, that's the most genius idea for a story. Yeah. And that's often the case with good stories. It's stories that resonate with us because they're real. I mean, I've heard so many places that there are no new stories. There's the same kind of 6 or 7 stories that fall into one of those categories. Right.
And I think that also shows it's like Castaway, you could imagine without that setup, just somebody surviving on an island would be a totally different film without because a big part of Act 1 is setting up the themes of the story as well, right? And I would say in Castaway, a big theme is time. Right. That he's this guy who lives on the clock and every minute counts, and he's trying to create this perfect assembly line for the FedEx system, and then he's forced to kind of live
efficiency
off the clock on the island. But if that's not set up before, it doesn't hit you when it says 4 years later and you realize he's so off the clock at this point, so out of like trying to spend every minute to try to be more efficient and blah, blah, blah. And then that becomes a big part of what you're focusing on when he's on the island. This sort of transformation, or where are you spending your time? Going back to your thing of He's spending no time with his girlfriend. He's spending all his time at work. The prioritization of time.
And clearly he would say that he cares more about his girlfriend than his
I think that's what
job.
you find out when he's on the island, right? And he's got the locket and he's got the picture of her, and that's really what matters when everything's taken away.
I think it's
all those things you don't get, obviously, without the setup.
Right.
So you can imagine a film where someone washes up on an island. That's the first scene. Not saying that would be a bad film, but
then it's going to be about something very different than surviving.
It could be the same story. I mean, the same plot. Somebody tries to figure out how to survive on an island. Somebody has something wash up shore that helps them escape the island. They get off the island. They get rescued. It could be a totally different film.
It's something that when I look at old films that I've made, you know, some of the first films I made when I back in school, the thing that they're lacking is like a reason to care about the characters.
Yeah, same. I think that's the hardest.
Like you think that it's enough to have something interesting happen to them or something dramatic happen to them, as if but what you end up with is this empty character that you don't know who they are, you don't know what they care about, you don't know what they want or what they need, and these things happen to them, but you can't really get into it because you don't know how they feel about any of it.
Yeah.
Because you have no understanding of what's going on inside their head.
Right.
Because you don't know who they are.
Right.
And so you put this character through a series of events that might actually be interesting, but you're left with a weak story because the stakes are so low. You don't know what's at stake, basically, because you don't know them.
Because it's never really the thing that they're doing that is interesting. It's interesting because it's happening to that person that we care about. For example, I feel like in college a lot, it's like, there's some guy who's selling drugs, you know, something along the lines which we think is a very like interesting story.
Yeah, it's edgy.
Right. But then we immediately forget to go like, the real interesting thing here is like, who is this guy? What's his situation?
Why is he selling drugs?
Why is he selling drugs? What consequences would that have potentially for him? Does he have a girlfriend who disagrees with it? Does he have a family? What's his situation?
What happens if he stops selling drugs?
Why is it a big deal that he's selling drugs? When he goes to that drug deal and something happens, it's like, why do we care unless we kind of know all these things about the person?
So a good example would be that. So a character goes, you somehow understand that they're a drug dealer because you see that they have some drugs in their bag.
Right.
I'm imagining this is like a student film. They arrive at a location where they're going to meet someone else, potentially someone they're going to give the drugs to in exchange for money. And something happens where the drugs are stolen from them.
Right.
And now the filmmaker thinks this is a dramatic moment. The drugs are stolen from them.
This is Robin's film we're slowly describing.
Digging into...
Wait, is it?
It's
very similar.
It's pretty much exactly.
But it's like, I think it's something that
it's a student film, so it's perfect.
Yeah, it's
perfect. Actually, keep going.
Yeah.
Don't talk about the other films. Just
and you know, you can be forgiven. The filmmaker can be forgiven for thinking that that's a dramatic moment because something happened, something negative happened to that character, and now we need to get the drugs back. We need to figure out what happens next. But no one cares about it because you don't know what that means.
Exactly, and I think a lot of times in a short film, the tendency is to really that should be the climax then, right? Obviously, it depends on the situation. But it's like we want to know all these things about the character before that sort of climactic thing happens. Because again, that's the most interesting part. Nobody cares about a drug deal at the end of the day.
But what you would care about is if you've set up beforehand that the reason this guy's a drug dealer is because he's desperately trying to make enough money so that he can pay for his mother's operation, that if she doesn't get it, she's going to die. And the reason why he's doing drugs as opposed to other things is because for his whole life he's been told that he is a nobody, he's no good at anything, and that because of that he gets kicked out of school, and so he has no real education. And he's really suffering because of it, and this is kind of the path that he's been led to. And now it's the big moment where he's finally in a situation where he might be able to get the money that he needs for his mother. And then the drugs and the money get stolen from him.
Suddenly we understand
you
the
have
consequences.
something where, I want this guy to get the money back. Because in some small way care about him.
Right.
You can establish that very quickly. We kind of got a little bit off track there because I think we were talking about want versus need, and then you also threw in the term first act.
Yes.
Which we haven't talked about what that means, but something that is prominent in any story of any length is this concept of a 3-act structure.
Yeah. A beginning, a middle, and an end.
As simple as that.
Not necessarily in that order.
Pretty much in that order.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean it has to be like chronological or,
Right.
It's not a...
But let's talk about that. There's a book called Screenplay by a fella named Sid Field, who he's considered to be like the godfather of screenwriting. He wrote the original screenwriting book where a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about kind of stems from.
Yeah.
But it's based, like you said, on like Aristotle's concepts written. I don't know.
The godfather of screenwriting books.
Yeah.
Not the not the godfather of screenwriting.
No.
Yeah.
Of screenwriting books.
Yeah.
Yes. Let's be clear on that. And it's basically the setup, the confrontation, followed by the resolution.
Yes.
And it's so simple, and it's so interesting to try and apply films that to that structure.
Yeah.
And see how they fit in. Well, let's actually be a little bit more specific. It's not just 3 acts. It starts with what's called an inciting incident or a catalyst.
Yeah.
Or there's a lot of words for it, but let's just go with catalyst.
Well, it starts with, not necessarily, but it starts with the status quo, which we were talking about.
Yeah.
We see a character in their everyday life.
Yeah.
This is the most everything we're going to say is going to have here's this one example where it's slightly different, right?
Yeah.
So again, like we're saying, these are just guidelines, but like the standard movie starts with some sort of status quo, some sort of seeing what the character's everyday life is. And then you have the inciting incident that I just read, it happens to the character.
This is something that happens to the character. That without this happening, we would not have a story.
Yeah. And it changes their status quo.
This is the plane crashing in Castaway.
Yeah.
Or it's the being invited to Jurassic Park in Jurassic Park.
Right.
The first scenes of the film set up and establish who the characters are. It's a couple working on a fossil dig site out in the desert somewhere, trying to find dinosaurs that are extinct, that are dead. Yeah. The inciting incident is the moment that they get invited to come to a park that apparently has dinosaurs on it.
Right.
Without that moment, there would be no story. It's the interesting part that you were bringing up is that it's something that happens to them. It's something that's kind of out of their control.
Exactly. And it will lead to them making a decision.
Right. And that's the point at which it feels like, now the story's really starting.
Yeah.
There's this sense that there's a very clear point, and it tends to come like 25, 30 minutes into the film. That, okay, now we've learned who the characters are. We know what their situation is. We kind of know what this is kind of going to be about.
Yeah.
And then there's a point at which it feels like, all right, now we're really in the story.
Yeah.
Now everything's happening. And that's the beginning of Act 2.
Yes.
And that point has a lot of different, you can call it a lot of different things. You can call it the break into Act 2.
The plot point 1.
You can call it the first plot point. The first thing that is now a moment where the main character makes a decision that leads us into the story.
It's where the film becomes really fun, There's like
now we're off.
The fun and games start to happen.
It's like there's no turning back now.
Yeah, we're off on an adventure. Right before this, the character has been debating
what to do.
Yeah.
Should I do this? Should I not do this?
The most easy thing is like literally if you're going on an adventure, deciding should I go, should I not go, and we're off.
Yeah, Lord of the Rings.
We watch them start their journey.
The moment when Frodo and Sam, they set off.
Yeah.
And they start walking.
Is Act 2.
There we go. Now the story has begun. This is what you paid to go into the movie theater to watch.
Yeah.
How are they going to get this ring? to where it needs to go.
Exactly.
Here, it's starting now.
Exactly.
But you need everything else in the setup in order to care about why the fuck this is important.
Exactly.
Let's look at The Matrix real quick.
Sure.
So in The Matrix, we were trying to identify what the inciting incident is.
Yeah.
And according to what we were just saying, it has to be something where without this happening, there would be no story.
Yeah.
And it was actually a little bit difficult with The Matrix, we found, because the very first scene could in a way be an inciting incident.
It's an example of the status quo. There not being a lot of status quo.
Yeah, it kind of starts...
We're thrown into a situation where something's changing.
Right. Let's also, just for those of you who know The Matrix very well, there is the scene that happens straight away, which is something that's called a hook, which is often a mysterious scene where very little is explained, but it's kind of it gets your attention. It makes you think like, whoa, I want to know why all this is happening. And that scene is definitely present in The Matrix, where Trinity's being chased across rooftops by cops, and suddenly she makes this massive jump across a building, and it's totally unexplained why she's able to do that.
Yeah.
It totally defies the laws of gravity. But the film really starts when Neo wakes up from a nap. He's sitting at his computer, and suddenly someone starts typing to him through his computer.
Yeah.
And it's definitely a feeling of this hasn't happened before. He's confused by it. What does it mean? What do we do? But the only thing that you can't quite answer with that is, well, you don't really know what the story's going to be about from that. So we were thinking that really the inciting incident comes a little bit later, after the character of Morpheus has called him and told him that agents are coming to your workplace to arrest you. You need to get out of here. And a scene unfolds in which Neo tries to escape, but is ultimately captured by these agents, specifically Agent Smith. And Agent Smith tells him that you have no choice in this matter. You need to help us find and capture Morpheus. So this moment is a point at which the character is kind of given an ultimatum, and it's very much out of his control. He's told, you have to help us find this guy.
Yeah.
And without that moment, there really is no story.
Yeah. I think we're also saying, at least for me, sometimes it's a bit of it's like once you find the inciting incident, it seems obvious, but it's a bit of a struggle to get there.
It's a little bit difficult to find it sometimes.
At times.
Sometimes it's super obvious.
Yeah.
Like a plane crashing in Castaway.
But even then, like my first reaction was, oh, it's when he gets the phone call for that plane, which is going to crash.
Right.
So everything's going normal. They're at a Christmas dinner, and he gets a phone call, or he gets a, what's it called? It's not a phone call. It's a pager.
Yeah.
That he's going to have to work.
Right.
And then him and his wife try to figure out if that's okay. He goes on the plane, and the plane ends up crashing.
You know why it's not that? It's because that's still part of the status quo. It's clear that happens all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
He always gets interrupted.
Yeah.
He always has to go and do something.
Yeah.
It's part of what they're used to.
Yeah. So the thing is, it's not like, oh, domino effect. What was the first domino?
Yeah.
You're actually looking for a specific domino in the set, which
the one
makes it kind of...
It's like if you had to, that movie trailer voice guy who says, one man living in a world until one day so-and-so happened. Something happened.
Yeah.
Like, what's that thing? What's the thing that happened that this
changes
is about?
everything?
Yeah, the thing that changes everything. And sometimes it's super dramatic and obvious, and sometimes it's so subtle that you didn't even notice that it happened.
Yeah.
But when you go back and analyze it, it's like, oh, right. If that had never happened, there would be no story.
It's almost, sometimes it can be quite satisfying in a film where you don't quite realize.
Yeah, it's when it's done
it's
well.
Only in hindsight that you're like, oh, now I see how important that scene was.
Right.
But it's, very seamlessly kind of stitched into all the other scenes. Because otherwise it would also make it could make it predictable at times. If you recognize it, you're going to go, I see where this is going. But when it kind of subtly kind of hits you, it's a very, you're saying for Joker, it's like when he gets the gun.
Right.
And it's like, it's a big moment, but it's also like, a lot of times in those situations, you're still just in the scene, in the film and digesting the scenes. And you're like, okay, I see it. And then you see him, there's going to be some spoilers in this, probably we should have said at the beginning, but.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. And he shoots the people on the train, and then you kind of go back and you're like, of course.
That's when it all kind of kicked off.
Yeah.
Without that, there would be no riots. There would be no media attention. He wouldn't get on the show. He wouldn't feel the way he does.
Yeah.
He wouldn't. Yeah, there would be no Joker. But let's continue with The Matrix, because The Matrix has the perfect first plot point, the break into Act 2, the point at which it now switches from being about setting up the story to, all right, we're off on this specific journey, this story. And that's the moment when he's asked to choose between the red pill and the blue pill.
Yeah.
It's such a literal metaphor for, are you willing to go on this journey or are you not?
Yeah.
If he picks the red pill, there is no Matrix, there is no story.
Yeah.
He's not going to wake up. But obviously he picks the blue pill.
Right.
And so now the story starts. Now we know the rules, kind of. Well, actually, in this case, we don't know, but we're about to find out. Okay, let's go. Let's do it.
Yeah. I think that's like we were saying, the difference between the inciting incident and plot point 1 is that one very much happens to the character, and plot point 1 going into Act 2, it's very much the character makes a decision.
Yeah. They choose to do it.
Yeah.
In Lord of the Rings, the inciting incident is the ring being given to Frodo. Bilbo leaves the ring for Frodo to find. Mm-hmm. Frodo picks it up. He doesn't even know what it is. It's not his fault. He's no choice in the matter. But that is kind of the first time he meets the ring, and that's what ultimately the whole film is about. It's about this ring and going back to Mordor with it, and it's his journey. But it's not his choice. It becomes his choice when he says, I accept the burden. I am going to carry this ring. Yeah. I'm going to be the one to do it. And that's when the real film begins, or the real story.
Yeah.
So should we just quickly outline what typically a 3-act structure looks like? So we've got the inciting incident, and it's helpful to talk about it in terms of like minutes into the film or page count in a script. It's weird how often the exact time code of the film matches up to what is apparently when it should happen. So Sid Field says that the inciting incident should happen kind of around page 10, and that plot point 1, the break into Act 2, should happen around page 30.
Yeah. And for those people who don't know, 1 page in a script is typically 1 minute on screen.
Equated to a minute.
So it's the same as 10 minutes into the film, 30 minutes into the film.
And then there's the midpoint, which funnily enough comes at the midpoint, which is typically around 60 minutes into the film, if we're talking about a 2-hour film. And then the second plot point, which is now the end of the second act and the beginning of the third act, comes at around 90 minutes. And then the final climax comes at 10 minutes before the end, roughly. I should say that before the final climax, there's very often what's known as the all is lost moment, an ultimate low point for the main character, in which you feel like there's absolutely no hope that they could possibly get out of this. All is lost, which is the perfect dip that's needed to get you back into the climax.
Yeah, it just makes sense. It contrasts the climax and makes it that much of a bigger moment.
We both watched Aaron Sorkin's masterclass on Masterclass, and he said that you should always make the stakes as high as possible.
Yeah,
it's a funny thing because you're always like, or at least I felt like, well, you like, what about like subtlety? What about like like not being so dramatic or over the top? But I kind of think that it's true. It's like the higher you can make the stakes, but still make them believable to this world and this character's life, the better. Because it makes it more, there's more at stake. You care about it more. Yeah. It's more dramatic.
Yeah. I think that the thing might be, what does it mean to have high stakes? Yeah. That a lot of people might interpret that as like, there's a war going on, and that it has epicness, right? As opposed to like family conflict, that could have huge stakes, right?
It's like
it depends on.
Let's say that if the main character decides to go to this one event, the stakes could be that his mother would be upset with him, but ultimately would forgive him a few days later.
Right.
Or the stakes could be that this would completely shatter the mother's view of who he is and ultimately lead to them falling apart and ruining their relationship. What's a way that you can make that the stakes?
Yeah.
It's not always that you can find something that's realistic, that makes sense.
Right.
But if you can find something that feels real, that has stakes that are that high, it's going to make for a better story.
Yeah.
Because there's more at stake.
I would think so.
It's like when you play poker. It's more exciting if if you're all in.
Yeah.
It's,
But again, it depends so much on the setup of the character. Yeah. What do they care about?
Yeah.
Something that could be, you could make something have huge stakes that only makes sense to that character because we've set it up in that way. They care so much about this thing, and this is such a huge moment for them.
Stakes for them.
That we will then care about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to note.
That reminds me of the other thing that Sorkin said. That funny tongue twister that I can never get right.
Oh. An impossible probability is better than a possible improbability. Would you like to explain?
Yeah, so I understand what it means in theory, but I struggle very much to get the wording right.
Yeah.
Basically, he's saying that you can get an audience to believe something impossible.
Yeah.
Like the fact that E.T. exists, or that lightsabers exist, or that magic is real in Harry Potter.
I think the example was that like E.T. is an impossible being.
Yeah.
But E.T. following a trail of breadcrumbs, right?
Yeah.
Is something that we're like, that seems believable.
Right.
That an alien would do that.
Right.
And follow some food to get somewhere.
Yeah.
It's
like grounded in reality.
Exactly. It's something that we would, or I guess any sort of like cartoon or anything is kind of an impossible. I don't think that's necessarily the example, but there's certain things where you're like, obviously this can't exist in the real world, but I can.
Once I believe that, I'm not constantly questioning the believability of this now. I've accepted this as being the truth.
Exactly.
Now everything else has to be realistic within that world that you are believing.
Exactly. Is better than a possible improbability.
Yeah.
Which means something that is real and exists in the real world, something that is possible, but that's very improbable. That's very hard for us to believe as an audience.
Like if the main character suddenly wins the lottery late in the film, and that's what solves the entire conflict that the movie's been building up to, it's like, where did that come from? It came out of nowhere. It's totally unjustified. It's so improbable. Obviously possible.
Yeah.
That could happen.
Yeah.
But it's very unsatisfying. And it makes you go like, well, that's convenient.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Another example would be what was that film about the bomb on the plane? It was also an example used in the masterclass where there's a bomb on a plane.
Yeah.
A stewardess discovers the bomb, calls the FBI or the CIA.
I think calls the air control tower.
Yeah.
And the air control tower then calls some dude. I forget who the dude was. Some guy who works
the stewardess calls for help.
Yeah.
Says there's a bomb on the plane.
Yeah.
The person on the other end of the line is like, okay, we need to get a bomb expert to talk to you so that you can disarm the bomb.
Right.
And the person that they call is the main character,
right,
who we've just been introduced to in the scene before. He's on a mission where he's shadowing a bad guy.
That's it.
He's out in the middle of the field, getting in and out of trains, trying not to get discovered, running through crowds, trying to follow this guy. He then gets the call from the dude saying, there's a bomb on a plane.
Right.
You are the only one who can defuse it. And in the script, the guy's like, okay, put her on the line. Yeah. And while he's following this person, he's also telling the stewardess how to disarm the bomb.
Right.
And it's like, right, I guess that's possible, but it seems totally improbable.
Yeah, that they wouldn't call somebody else.
Yeah, is he the only guy who can do that?
Yeah.
Like, what the hell?
Yeah.
So what Aaron Sorkin was saying is, well, the way to get around that, well, there are multiple ways. But if you really
good
like
way-
that scene,
Yeah.
is to have the guy on the line go like, what the fuck? I'm in the middle of something here. Do you not have anyone else you can call?
Yeah.
And then the guy on the other end is saying, no, you're the only agent who's currently working. Like everyone else is, you know,
Whatever the situation,
Yeah.
you'd have to figure that out. But yeah.
explaining, acknowledging
Exactly.
how weird this is.
Exactly. Because it takes the power away from the audience to go, oh, well, this would never happen.
Yeah.
If in the film you go, this would never happen, but now it's happening.
Yeah.
And it's been addressed.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. And you can just go along with it.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. Yeah. It's a really good rule to have in the back of your head.
Like
I
once
mean, obviously, you should try to fix it, in a different way, I think. But if you really, like the scene, or you're like, this is the setup that I want, addressing that, I think, is huge.
Maybe another way to look at it is you can only really have one thing be a standout. Like that's totally unbelievable. You can't keep doing it.
I think you can, but it's like, again, it's the setup of the film. If you're doing something absurd,
Yeah.
and you set up the film in that way, people understand that that's the world we're in,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going to be willing to accept all these absurdities because it's the way the film's been set up. I think it's if you 80 minutes into the film kind of do like a weird switch all of a sudden
Right.
that isn't justified or hasn't been set up anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
then it's that feeling of like, oh, like that's the thing that solved the problem, or it just feels very unsatisfying in a way.
I've heard a lot of places that what you really want is to make the audience at the critical moment and the climax feel like, well, right before the climax happens, they should be feeling like, I have no idea how this is going to end well, or how this is going to end. And as soon as it happens, it feels inevitable,
Yeah.
which is a very difficult thing to achieve because it means you have to set up that the ending that is delivered
Yeah.
is something that feels like, of course.
Right.
Of course that was going to happen.
Right.
But I didn't see it coming,
Yeah.
which is tough.
Is very tough. But I also think always a good example I like is that there was a couple German plays I read, and I think Shakespeare does it as well, where it proves that people are more interested in how a story happens rather than what the actual story is. Because there are plays out there that will start saying, this is how the play is going to end.
Right.
A little
Yeah.
poem that kind of says the whole story.
Yeah.
I think Romeo and Juliet starts by saying they're going to die at the end.
Right.
I mean, most Shakespeare plays, it's a tragedy. They're all going to die at the end. And the interesting part is, how do we get to that end?
Right.
I don't necessarily need to be like, oh shit, I didn't see that coming. That's a crazy story twist or something.
Yeah.
It's much more the focus on like the characters in the story, how the story is told, how this story develops, and that knowing the end, which you might say is like, oh, something predictable, doesn't necessarily ruin the film
No.
at all.
I mean, how often do you watch a film where you know that the good guy's going to win
Yeah,
and the
but
bad
you
guy's
still
going to
wanna
die?
see it, huh?
You still want to know how the
Yeah.
fuck he dies and if it feels
Yeah.
like revenge was had.
Yeah.
That's the stuff that makes it interesting.
Yeah.
Every so often you'll be hit with an amazing twist that just is even more amazing to
Yeah.
watch. But
And
that's
like
not
a type
the only
of film
way.
as well.
Right, yeah.
It's like you separate those into, I think another really good one, just looking at it, is Sorkin was saying, if it's confusing, the character needs to be confused.
Right.
Which I think is the point with Matrix.
Yeah.
You need somebody that is confused with you
Yeah.
if you have something confusing.
Yeah.
So that you don't go, shit, did I miss anything?
Right.
Am I like...
Yeah, if the character's confused, you're like, oh,
Right.
so am I.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm meant to feel.
Yeah.
You don't want someone to feel confused and think that it's their fault and that's not what you're supposed to be feeling right
No,
now.
because then it's the person in the room who suddenly goes watching it like, hey, wait, what happened to that? Is that guy supposed to...
Well, I missed that. Wait,
Whoa,
why?
whoa, let's go back.
And it's like, no, we don't know why. That's
Yeah,
supposed to
exactly.
be the thing.
Exactly.
You need to make that clear. We had that on a recent project we're working on. I can't remember the exact example, where it was like, this is confusing, but it's kind of meant to be.
Yeah.
How can we address that?
I think it was Borisnian.
Was it?
I think so.
And make the character himself confused.
Yeah, it's like adding a scene where you're like, hey, everybody, I know you're not supposed to be in the know right now, but I'm not giving you any help with that. I'm not sort of going, it's okay that you're confused, so keep watching the film.
Yeah.
It'll sort itself out.
Yeah.
By having a scene where the character's like, it would be so literal, but like, I'm confused. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Right? And then everybody can kind of like relax and settle back into the story.
Unconfuse myself by watching what happens next.
Yeah, I don't need to figure this out. I haven't been given the information to figure this out.
Yeah.
So is another very, very good point, you know. And it's so like, I think that's something you get better at as well, is trying to predict how the audience is going to be feeling at certain points in your story. And obviously it's difficult because you know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So to get in the mindset of somebody who has never read this story, who has no idea what's going on, to know how they're going to be feeling, what they're going to be understanding at that part of the story, I think is like a skill that you build very slowly. And I like the Nicholas Winding Refn was comparing it to like when he's writing, he's playing chess, you know. He makes a move and then he's predicting the move that the audience is going to make back. And then based on that, he's making his next move.
And he's thinking 4 moves ahead as well.
And that's how he's thinking, right?
Yeah.
That he's always keeping the audience in his mind when he's writing. I'm going to give them this piece of information. How are they going to react? What is the best next bit of information to give them based on that reaction? And off of that kind of building your story.
It's like, it's a trust relationship as well. Your audience has to trust you.
Yeah.
I've heard, I keep saying I've heard this so many places, but I really feel like there's like so many similarities across the board. A lot of different people have slightly different versions of these different structures that we're talking about, these different rules, but there's like this broad feeling that it's all kind of grounded in the same place. And I've heard that, you know, if someone gets shot in Act 3, you have to show the gun in Act 1.
Yeah.
You can't suddenly have someone pull a gun out of a drawer that you never knew was there.
Yeah.
So if you want that to happen, you have to show it in Act 1.
I think it's the reverse as well. If you show a gun in Act 1,
you have to use it.
Use that gun at some point.
You can't not use it. Unless, you know, you've crafted a very conscious, you know, misdirection.
Yeah.
And really that, of course they never use the gun because of this other thing.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
But it's, you have to trust the person who's creating the story. When you're watching something, there's a feeling of exactly what you were talking about with like, you're right to be confused right now.
Yeah.
Hold tight.
Yeah.
We're getting there.
Exactly.
That's trust. I trust that I'm going to learn about it. As soon as you feel like, hang on, I'm missing something, you lose trust and you start to question everything.
Yeah. Or if you start to, I think that's what he gets at with the possible improbability. As soon as somebody goes, that wouldn't really happen, you've lost all their trust.
Yeah, and it's hard to build that trust back up.
Yeah,
it's possible, but it's very difficult.
I think so.
Do you have any examples of like scenes in films where like, oh wow, that would never happen, and it totally takes you out of it?
I think all the time, but it would be hard for me now to think of a specific example.
Yeah, maybe that's a tough one on the spot. Oh, I have one. So the movie Signs, I really like. Signs is a movie starring Mel Gibson where suddenly there's these massive signs written into crops around the world, and
is it M. Night Shyamalan?
M. Night Shyamalan, yeah. And it kind of leads to this climactic scene in which the aliens, turns out to be aliens who are making these signs, surrounded the house and are trying to get in. And they're trying to fight back these aliens from the inside. And at some point, an alien gets into the house. And it turns out that the only way to defeat them is using water. And that's some random thing that happens when it knocks over a glass of water and water is spilt onto its skin and it suddenly like starts sizzling. And it's something that hasn't really been set up.
Yeah, I can't quite remember. I did quite recently watch that film.
It feels a little bit like okay, so now you're revealing the weakness of the alien.
Right.
Last scene.
Right.
Convenient.
Right.
To the film's defense, I don't think that it's about how to defeat the aliens. It's actually about religion and faith, and that actually very much highlights that. So maybe I'm taking my point back. The film is all about just having faith in something beyond yourself, God in this case, and that everything in their life has been leading to this one moment: their mother dying, the little girl's weird obsession with drinking a sip from a glass of water and then getting a new glass and filling it up, and then the house is littered with water everywhere. The brother of the main character having this inability to not just swing as hard as possible when it comes to playing baseball and striking out, and is now a failed athlete because of that. It all leads to all those pieces coming together in the last scene, which is how they're able to defeat the aliens ultimately. So I take it back. That is totally justified.
I think people understand what we mean when
there are moments when you're watching a film where you kind of go like, oh, that wouldn't really happen.
Yeah. And it's not even like, you could have a moment where somebody just doesn't understand, like you just almost had, where it's like, oh, actually that was justified.
Yeah.
You know,
there's a difference.
We're not saying that, like, but still, there's definitely a feeling in a I think when watching a movie where you either go, I just don't think that would happen, and I think you kind of think it unconsciously, and it just takes you out of the story.
Yeah,
ultimately,
it starts to make you see it suddenly like, oh, this is all fake. I mean, it is all fake. I mean, you know that a movie's not real. It's a movie. There's actors. It's taken years to make, probably.
Right.
Like, it's not chronological, really. They're all joking around. My mom used to tell me if something bad happened in a movie, like, you know, if someone died or something scary happened, she always used to tell me, don't worry, you know, after they finish filming, they're all sitting around laughing and drinking sodas together. Yeah. And I always used to go like, oh yeah, it's true. It's not real. And it would like be nice to think that way. But you don't want to be thinking that while you're in it, because then you lose the momentum of what's being created. Yeah. This is taking up a lot of time to talk about. It seems like there's a lot of really interesting material.
We only got through like 10% of what we wanted to talk about.
Yeah, we had a whole plan. Maybe we'll do a part 2 if people are into this. Or maybe it's too specific. I don't know. Let us know what you think. You want to know more. We were going to get into like character arcs. We were going to get into Blake Snyder's 15-point story structure.
Yeah. Getting into Dan Harmon's story structure. Getting into, well, we didn't really even get past, I guess we kind of outlined it, but we could definitely get into Act 2 more and Act 3 more.
Yeah, like talking about the importance of the midpoint in the film. We never got to that.
Building characters, conflict, how huge conflict is in writing.
Scenes, how scenes should kind of follow the same story structure as the whole film, with a setup, confrontation, and a kind of building to a single point at the end. Yeah. That leads to the next scene. A lot of really interesting stuff. There's a reason why...
We could go on forever.
We could go on forever. And there's a reason why it's not easy to do, because there's a lot to keep in mind. It's something that can actually be a little bit overwhelming while you're writing, because suddenly you have to be thinking about so many different aspects all at once. Yeah. So it's really important, we've found, to spend a lot of time in the planning phase. Before you start writing.
Before you start writing,
a lot of work.
It's just making decisions. I find it so hard sometimes just to, like, once you have those guidelines, you're kind of trying to fill in blanks a little bit at times. Yeah. And it's that, like, infinite possibility of things that could happen to your character. But I also think the more work you put into the setup, the more work you put into this world, the easier those decisions kind of become. Yeah. You know? Sort of easier to spot a good idea when you have one. You go, that's perfect for that. Yeah. Thing. Yeah. You know.
The more you know where you're going, and the more points you kind of already have set up that you're gonna hit throughout your story, the more you can focus on getting to those points, and the more you can create a focused and compelling story. Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of times you're gonna be. It makes sense to spend time at the very beginning. Spend a lot of time, because ultimately you're going to write the script, and then you're going to spend 2 years of your life making a movie, spending millions of dollars based on sort of this foundation of
And if there's a flaw there, it's so difficult to remove it or to fix it.
Let me tell you, that is.
We spent so much time editing and re-editing Boris and Johan, because there were some fundamental flaws in the story structure that we kept realizing. It took us a long time to realize what the flaws were.
Yeah, there were just some
Something's off.
Flaws that, again, this is why you have to do the research, because I think also the people that I showed it to, including you.
Yeah, we're having the same thing.
Were what?
Being like, oh, this feels a little weird there.
Not when they read the script.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, the film, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, the script is like, you need to have somebody who can recognize that in the script.
Who knows
it was,
how a script works.
Yeah, it's only
such a
when we
weird
got
thing
to
read.
the end, we were like, huh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That didn't quite work.
Yeah.
Right. We'll consider doing a part 2 if people are interested.
And we'll see you next week
On the Burning Boat Show.